hours later, they were browsing, which was a big deal in those days, because how did they learn how to browse, etc. So all that is described in this. But here's what it looks like. This chap on the right is now quite grown up. He was 8 at that time. To his left is a student who was 6 at that time. And he was teaching her how to browse.
She said, no, absolutely not, because I didn't have
every time they do something, you just say, wow, that's fantastic. How did you do that? When I was your age, I was so stupid. I mean, you all have grandmothers. You know that the technique that the grandmother uses is quite different from the technique that a mother or a teacher uses. The grandmother uses admiration. The teacher and the parent uses discipline. So there's a vital difference between the two. So anyway, this girl, Rekha, she got the hang of that method. She practiced it for 2 months. The scores rose from 30 to 50. So that time we realized that this is probably a different mechanism by which learning objectives can be met without a teacher. That was the girl who cracked the whole problem. But anyhow, the conclusion from that part of this work was this. I mean, it looks like 4 simple lines, but just look at what he's trying to say. It's never happened to education before. People still don't quite believe it. I can see, I can feel telepathically from you that you don't believe it. But believe me, it's true. Or at least we haven't found the limit yet. So I came back to England, and Slumdog Millionaire was released, and we just heard that, you know, the author of the book said, oh, I was inspired by the hole in the wall experiment and so on. So at that time I was getting interviewed by the Guardian newspaper in England. So in that paper, in that interview, just out of curiosity, I said, can you put in a couple of lines from me? Can you say that if you are a British grandmother, if you have broadband and a webcam, can you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free? And in a couple of weeks, we had several hundreds. And we still have a pretty large number with maybe 40, 50, 60 active at any point in time. And what do? I can use Skype to beam them into schools where they either don't have any teachers or they have very poor quality teachers. Or in your kind of context, for example, supposing you're in the middle of a really difficult lesson on quantum mechanics and the professor falls ill. So instead of saying you have to wait until he gets better, you could either get anybody, any quantum mechanics teacher anywhere in the world to come and teach it, or you could learn it by yourself. This is what the hole in the wall was suggesting. We called it the granny cloud. So that's what the granny cloud kind of looks like. It's a life-size image on the wall. And children, she doesn't teach. She just carries on a free-flowing conversation. Because remember, in the hole-in-the-wall style of learning, no one teaches. Learning happens.
Excellent. Give us that. Absolutely.
Hello, I'm Tim.
Hi.
I'm alright. Have you heard of the footballer called Wayne Rooney?
Yes.
What sort of player does Wayne Rooney look like?
Maybe.
I tell you.
So remember the hole in the wall says children can self-instruct. The later experiments say they seem to be able to learn anything by themselves. The third experiment says the presence of a friendly mediator, just the presence, can improve this kind of learning. So far I had this story really down. So back in England, after all this had been published, an English school teacher, primary school teacher came and met me and said, you know, why don't we try some experiments in a local school there? There's a school there called St. Aidan's Primary School in a city called Gateshead, near the city called Newcastle. So it's a smallish, tiny school, and basically the children are from lower middle class families of Britain. In that school, we started to apply self-organizing principles. How do you do that? It's very simple. Take a classroom, empty out the furniture, put say about 5 computers, big screens, with full access to the internet. Bring in 20 children. Now, if you've got 5 computers and you've got 20 children, what will they do? The whole will go up, start gathering around the computers. Then you raise a question. Make it an interesting question, the kind of question that children like. Or whatever age group you're dealing with, kind of question that will engage that particular age group. And then you just leave them alone. You go away. Because remember, we want to have a chaotic situation. So you might say, oh, but the children will play games. Yes, they will for a while. Then you say, but they'll, look at each other's work. Say, sure, what's wrong with that? They'll run about the place. Very nice, and then. So you just leave it alone. And then you come back after whatever time, 30, 40, 50 minutes. And you say, okay, so what's the answer? And what we find in experiment after experiment is that a rich, meaningful answer comes out. No matter how hard the question may be. We call this a self-organized learning environment, or SOAP. So what you need is broadband, collaboration, encouragement. Just the 3 things there. Here's what SOAP looks like. This is a 9-year-old Australian girl. She's talking about atomic structure, first year undergraduate physics. But we have a couple of problems. What happens to curriculum? Because if you look at our existing school curriculum, and if you start making souls around those, nothing much is going to happen. If you make a question like, what year did Akbar die? I mean, first of all, it's not the most interesting question in your life, is it? And secondly, it takes about 20 seconds or to find out. So, what's the big deal? So, making the question is difficult, and we need to look at the curriculum. How do you assess when people work in groups and they find an answer? Then what mark will you give? And thirdly, how do you certify? How do you certify an examination where everybody is cheating? Okay, I mean, I know we do it in this country, but we should. So, what happened next was that around 2011 or so, the idea of the soul started to spread out of England and went all over the world. So, from all 5 continents, teachers started experimenting with souls. At this point, I lost count of how many. There are tens of thousands of teachers using it in every continent. It spread out, but there remains, well, here's a sort of quick look at all the, I keep getting occasional reports from souls in various places, and what is remarkable is that they're all very similar to each other, so it works the same way everywhere. I told you about Slumdog Millionaire and how the idea of self-organized learning impacts popular culture. A school in Mexico went up from the bottom of the league table in arithmetic to the top. unlikely of places, Mike Atherton, the ex-England captain, wrote an article about cricket. And you know, I don't know, I mean, I don't play cricket. Do I look like I play cricket? so I don't even read much about cricket, except that I looked at that article and I suddenly saw my name in it. I said, what's my name doing in there? It must be there by mistake. And what Mike Atherton was writing was that new techniques in cricket, which come out of India and Sri Lanka, are probably the product of a mechanism very similar to the hole in the wall by your shooting. So that's how my name had come into Mike Atherton's article. So I was quite taken aback by it, but maybe he's right.